Welcome to a bonus episode of Solving JFK. You can see here I'm not in the normal place where I record with all my books and stuff behind me. Instead, I have a lake behind me, which is kind of cool. And we have an episode today. We're going to be talking to Will O'Halloran, and Will gave a really good presentation at JFK Lancer and I believe a couple other conferences specifically on Harrison Livingstone's interviews with the Parkland doctors after the HSCA. So that's really the specific focus of kind of what we're going to talk about today. I thought it went nice with the recent episode we had with Doug Horne.
Mhm.
Even though I try to keep the podcast linear, and we are linear in sort of the produced episodes. But hey, this is like a Patreon bonus episode. We're gonna keep doing stuff, kind of revisiting things we've already done, etc. So, without further ado, Will, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much, man. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did you get down this path?
First of all, I had always been an admirer of President Kennedy ever since I was uh, preteen. I had always actually had an interest in American history, specifically in that era. And President Kennedy has always been one of my heroes. But I'd actually never took an interest in his death specifically until the 50th anniversary. Before then, I had just accepted the official story of Oswald acting alone. I had no reason to doubt it. But what piqued my interest specifically was the documentary JFK the Smoking Gun, which, for any of you researchers out there, talks about the theory that Secret Service agent George Hickey accidentally fired the headshot. And that documentary really gave me this light bulb kind of moment where I realized, wait, there are actually people out there who don't believe Oswald did it? Really? Well, maybe I should look into this myself and see if I come up with the same conclusion or not. And from there, I looked at and watched and read everything I could find on the subject and have been going nonstop since.
Cool. So George Hickey did it, right? And we're done. Oh,
In a perfect world, maybe.
no, yeah, I don't think so. You want to kind of tell us a little bit about your presentation and how you got down that road and kind of who Harrison Livingstone was and just sort of the backstory of all that?
So that part of the medical evidence specifically with Harrison Livingstone's research, I first became interested in after I read his and Robert Groden's book High Treason back in 2021. Specifically, chapter two talks about Livingstone's interviews with the Parkland doctors. After I read that part of the book, I became interested in finding the raw materials of those interviews because the book mentions that they were given to the JFK library. And so, shortly after I read that part of the book, I contacted the library myself to see if I could obtain them. And they said, sure, we haven't had anybody ask about those things in years. So, first I contacted the textual archivists, and they sent me a file of handwritten and typed notes by both Livingstone and two reporters from the Boston Globe who followed up on his work a year and a half later. And then I asked to get the tape recordings of those interviews that they did with the doctors and nurses, which are important because they had never been made public before or digitized before, actually. As far as I know, the late Warren Commission apologist John McAdams and myself have been the only ones who have listened to them, probably since they were recorded. So I asked the audiovisual archivist, would you be willing to digitize them for me since I couldn't go to Boston myself to listen to them on site because I live in outside of Chicago. And she said, sure. And after a month, she digitized them all for me and emailed them to me. And then I spent half a year transcribing every single one since most of them didn't come with transcripts.
There's been a lot of testimony from Parkland doctors. Parkland doctors testified well, first of all, we have the written medical reports from the Parkland doctors, and then
Hmm.
we have the Warren Commission testimony from the Parkland doctors, which in some case, it's made to seem as if those are conflicting because of the way that the questions were asked to them during their testimony, and in some cases they were in fact conflicting. My question to you is, what is there any new insight that we learned from these Livingstone interviews after you went through them? What does that body of evidence tell us? That's is it I guess what's the big picture after looking at all of it?
For me, the big picture and the whole reason I wanted to look into that story specifically is because, as I said, the doctors and nurses had never seen any of the autopsy pictures before, and even though, granted, Livingstone he didn't show them the actual pictures since they weren't public yet. He showed them the tracings that were published by the HSCA, which I know a lot of researchers think that they're drawings, but actually, Ada Dox, the artist, clarified in her HSCA testimony that she traced them directly over the original photographs, so they're exactly the same thing, just with a few minor differences. And the big takeaway from those interviews is that, besides that being their first reactions to the picture, the fact that pretty much all of them, when they first saw it, had the same response. That being that this is not at all what we saw, and I don't remember the president's head looking this way.
So it's not, and so just to clarify, what I was saying before was like, oh, we've got the Warren Commission, we have the original statements, we have the HSCA, but what you have, what you're looking at in the Harrison Livingstone material specifically, what's unique about that is that they're being asked to react to the images of the autopsy photo and compare that to what their initial recollections were. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so when they did that, generally the position was it across the board? All of them said no, that's not what I recall.
Pretty much. Well, the only exception I could think of is Dr. Jackie Hunt. She was the only woman doctor in trauma room one that day. She admitted to Livingstone that because of where she was standing, she didn't see the head wound at all. She was standing on President Kennedy's left side. But she clarified that her colleagues told her that it was in the right posterior part of the head. So she didn't really have a yes or no answer. But the other doctors that Livingstone talked to, and those that the Boston Globe did, overwhelming majority of them, with the exception of Dr. Carrico, with the ones the Boston Globe talked to, pretty much all the others said, no, this is not what we saw. Though a couple did change their minds in later years,
Huh.
but the overwhelming majority of them did have the same response.
Wow. So it's one more data point. I mean, on top of, like, for example, JFK, what the doctor saw, uh,
Hmm.
it's just one more data point that supports the idea that what the doctor saw is not what the autopsy was.
Hmm.
So, what else? What other findings do you have from your research? Anything else you want to share with us?
Sure. So to kind of branch away from the uh, taped interviews with the doctors and nurses that I actually got digitized, and once I did, I put them on my YouTube channel, JFK Just the Facts. You can listen to them all there. Besides that, the big part of the medical evidence for me that has always been the most fascinating is the head wound, because obviously it was the cause of death. And it's only in recent years that I've noticed people at both the Parkland Hospital, the autopsy, and in the motorcade, overwhelming majority of them described the head wound the same way, that it was in the right side of the back of the head, or both the right side and the right back. And a super important um, piece of evidence that corroborates them, that actually, as far as I know, not many people on either side of the debate acknowledge, is that the autopsy report actually confirms what they saw. It doesn't describe the head wound differently. Because if you read the autopsy report's description of the head wound, it says, quote, there is a large irregular defect of the scalp and skull on the right involving chiefly the parietal bone, which is this green area, if you can see, but extending somewhat into the temporal, that's the orange area, and occipital regions, that's the brown area. So, believe it or not, the autopsy report generally places the head wound in the same location that all the eyewitnesses did. And if you look at, say, Dr. Boswell's drawings from the autopsy, you see that he drew the missing bone extending from the top all the way to the back. Now, of course, the explanation about the difference in size, that's a whole nother debate. We could probably get into some other time.
Let me ask you this. So
Mhm.
people whose perspective is that the Parkland doctors must have been mistaken because the autopsy shows us that, that the photos that we have available, for example, show that there is no defect in the rear of the head in the picture and in the X-ray. Um, what do you make of what do you think is, I mean, my understanding of their argument, I've talked, obviously spoken with Fred Litwin many times about this,
Mhm.
but it's just that everybody at Parkland must have been mistaken. But then everybody at Bethesda was correct, except for all of the orderlies and people who said there's a big old hole in the back of his head. Ignore them. Uh,
Uh-huh.
truly, that is
Cherry
the.
picking at its finest. Uh-huh.
I guess, can you steelman their argument? Like, what is? I'm trying to, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, because to me, it's you've got to choose between either the Parkland doctors, because they're all saying the same thing for the most part. Now there is some slight
Mhm.
variations, not all precisely the same, but they're all pretty much saying the same thing.
Mhm.
Um, so
Just general.
you have to either believe that, I mean, Aguilar and this woman whose name escapes me at the moment wrote this great book, great article a while back about the medical evidence, and they collected the initial statements of the first 43 doctors and nurses to comment on the head wound, and 43 or 44 said right rear. So you have to either all think those people are all made it up, or you have to think, well, are there shenanigans with the autopsy? And I know it's hard to, but like, to me, this is the main thing. This is the main split point. If you're a normie, you come into this case, you don't know anything about it. The autopsy and the medical evidence is where everybody diverges and goes on their merry way. It seems to me. Is
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
perspective? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, and like I said, Matt Douth and I go into much more detail about this in our documentary, but to to make it simple and to the point, I don't think it, to me, logically, there's no way that the people at Parkland or the autopsy for that matter could be wrong, since an overwhelming majority of them described the same head wound. I think the likelihood of them all being wrong is i-
Right.
astronomical. And like I said, my response to people like Fred Litwin and all lone nutters is simply, well, if you believe they're not telling the truth, just look at the autopsy report. It confirms what they saw. Even though it says that the head wound was chiefly parietal, it admits that it extended somewhat into the right side of the back of the head, which is another thing that people on both sides of the debate get wrong
Yeah.
to this day. They say that, oh, it was it must have been only in the side, only in the top, or only the back, when in reality it started about here, just above his right ear, and extended behind it, according to nearly everybody at Parkland and Bethesda. And also, again, what the autopsy report says, it started about here and went to here, and that was about the size of a fist, if not larger. So that means that the back of the head on the right side is completely unavoidable. And even Dr. Boswell's measurements saying that the head wound was 17 centimeters long, the occipital bone is unavoidable at 17 centimeters. So
So, do you have a theory of what happened for us to end up getting the autopsy results that we got? I mean, what do you think about what Doug Horne says? Do you have different perspective, or do you generally fall in line with what he says?
I don't agree with Doug's interpretation. Some of his interpretations I do,
Yeah.
but his feelings about the autopsy I don't disagree with. And there's a lot of evidence to support that, as I said, both the eyewitnesses and the autopsy are telling the truth. It's just that I think people tend to misperceive
Uh-huh.
them and try to make more out of the conflict than there really is. But the autopsy report and the eyewitness accounts versus the photographs and the X-rays, that's kind of a different story.
Uh-huh. So are you saying that the X-rays, I'm sorry, are you saying that the autopsy itself did basically was not fraudulent and that we just are interpreting it wrong? I mean, because the photos and X-rays are putting those aside, just the autopsy report itself, uh, as opposed to Doug's theory, which I gotta say, kind of coming around to after our last talk because he kind of laid a lot of it out.
Mhm.
But I try to stay open minded, man. But his I do have respect for him given his role, what he's done, you know. But um yeah, his theory is that there's like a separate medical procedure,
Yes.
not an additional autopsy, whatever, but like an earlier procedure. You
I'm aware of, yeah.
you
Mhm.
are not of that camp. Is that true? Would you say there was not any altering? I mean, just what's your perspective on how do we get from all the things that all the Parkland witnesses said and some of the Bethesda witnesses said to this image where the back of the head is intact if there was no forgery of the autopsy or no fraudulent autopsy, I guess.
Well, without going into too much detail or, giving my perspective away, all I can say is that
Give away your perspective, man. Let's hear it. I want to know your perspective.
well, I don't wanna go into too much detail, but alright, all I can say is that at this point in my research, no, I don't believe that the president's body was altered, and there is strong evidence to suggest that it never was, and that in fact, the president's body never left the bronze casket, and that the body in the shipping casket was that of somebody else that I think was simply just confused for Kennedy, even though I admit I did used to be a strong believer in uh, Doug and David Lifton's theories. But the more I've read
By the
since,
way, there,
yeah.
Doug would point out that they're different. But go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I mean, sorry, I should have clarified that. I should say, in general, I used to believe the body theft alteration theory for a long time, but the more I read, the more I realized how improbable it was. But f- for the photographs and the X-rays, like I said, I think there's much more sinister things going on with that than with the autopsy report and the eyewitness accounts.
Okay, so
That's kind of another thing.
so you would say then maybe not fraudulent autopsy, maybe not additional procedure, but fraudulent X-rays, fraudulent photo.
Most likely. Well, I mean, I should clarify that actually. Specifically, the photographs of the back of the head, I think at this point, are the only photographs that were doctored or tampered with, whereas all the others, the ones at the top of the head and the sides of his head, and the famous controversial one at the inside of the skull that nobody can orientate, those I think are all authentic. It's just that the head wound is being hidden in them, specifically hidden by the metal head brace he's lying on and the torn scalp in his hair.
Right. Well, there's also, yeah, the one where you see the back of his head. It looks like it's being held together by the doctor's hand. I mean,
All
it's
the ones at the back of the head I do think are fake,
yeah,
but
right on.
there's no way that, I mean, they would be able to cover up a defect that enormous and that, obvious just by pulling the scalp forward. That's one thing I disagree with Matt
Well,
and other people on, but
what about the work of Dr. Mantik and Dr. Chesser with the uh, optomic densitometer and the stereoscope, where they went in and looked at the X-rays? I mean, to me, see, there's not an academic expert counterpoint to that.
right.
So,
Mhm.
and I guess that's consistent with your theory because you're saying forgery of the photographs and the X-rays. Something I found out recently that I didn't know. Two things on that real quick.
Mhm.
First of all, So when I found out about David Mantik for the first time, the optical densitometer and the stereoscope, I immediately thought this sounds too good to be true from a like sort of conspiracy perspective. Like, come
Mhm.
on. I know there's a counterpoint. There's got to
Mhm.
be some other doctor who went to the National Archives and has a counterpoint paper about how Mantic is wrong, right? And I'm sure if I go to Bugliosi's book, he'll tell me that.
Uh-huh.
And to Bugliosi's book, and I got the CD-ROM out, and I had to find the CD-ROM thing for my computer to put it in as the whole thing, and uh, and I finally find his section on Mantik. He's got two paragraphs on Mantik, and he specifically mentions the optical densitometer, and he goes, Dr. David Mantik says that he's proven that the photos of the back of the head and the X-rays are fraudulent, and then he has one paragraph just listing all of the achievements of Mantik. Dr. David Mantik is a oncologist, radiologist, physicist, whatever. He's got like all these things he's done. He just talks about all of his credentials, and then the second paragraph that he has dedicated to him. This is addressing this whole thing. So you have this expert who I could put on the stand at trial, who is a legitimate subject matter expert.
Mhm.
And the way that he's attacking the expert is he goes, and so, given that someone is so smart, uh, it's crazy to think that they could come up with something so dumb. Oh, that's literally the rebuttal to David Mantik.
Uh,
So that was shocking to me. That was, and I got to tell Mantik that story at a cocktail hour, one of the conferences, and that was fun. I literally read to him. I took a picture of it, and I read to him what Bugliosi said about him. He got a kick out of that.
You can catch the rest of this episode over at patreon.com.